Hello everyone. Today, on this glorious day, I'm going to be working on my Triumph Tiger 800 with a bit of a problem. I believe the spring for the gear change is broken. So to begin with, I'm going to be removing our clutch cover, take out the clutch to get to the back of it to remove the shaft with the spring on. Okay, so first things first, we're going to use a 12mm spanner to undo this nut to allow us to unhook the end of this cable from this, and then we're going to use an 8mm socket to undo these bolts in a crisscross pattern or a star pattern to release the cover evenly. Two of these bolts are going to be longer than the others, so it's best to mark where they come out. So I've now removed all the bolts, and as you can see, there are two longer than the rest. And these two, one goes here in this one, and the other one goes down here. Now we're going to remove the cover. There's a couple of tabs going around it. There's one here, there's another one here, there's another one here, there's another one down in here to try and ease the cover off. Now it's going to be pretty hard to do this. It's going to be stuck on very well. Just be careful not to put too much pressure on one point, otherwise you might bend the cover. Okay, so now we have the cover off, and now you can see the clutch. Now it's worth mentioning, when you do take this cover off, you will get a little bit of oil seepage from inside the cover. It won't gush out, just a little bit will dribble out. Also, there are two dowel pins for locating this cover. One of them stayed in the cover and one of them stayed on the actual engine casing itself. They're located here and here. Next on our list, we need to undo these bolts here. We're going to undo them evenly. They're about a 10mm socket. Now with those 5 bolts and springs removed evenly, I should be able to take this clutch end cap off. And that leaves all of these clutch plates. So when you take all these clutch plates off, don't mix them up because they are in order. And every other disc is a friction disc. So now I'm going to take all of them out. You might need a magnet or a pick to get the last few out. Now I've removed all the plates, I thought I'd just show you the last few I've taken out. So this is the friction plate. It has these blocks on, which is a friction material, kind of like a brake pad. And as you can see, there's a thickness to them. Now, before I put it back together, I'm going to check how much wear these have and if I'm going to need to replace them in the near future. So my bike's done 18,000 miles, so I don't think I'll need to change it, but while I've got it out, it's worth checking. So that's the friction plate, and this is the metal disc, kind of like the actual brake disc, which it rubs up against. So with this, you want to check for any cracks or broken sections, and again thickness. And this, you want to check for warpage. To do that, you would lie it on a perfectly flat surface and use a feeler gauge to try and slide under the edges to see if it's warped. Also, you want to check for discoloration. I mean, it is slightly discolored, but that's perfectly normal. So you look for any grooves that have been worn into it. So this should still be perfectly flat on both sides. Now, on the last one, there are 2 washers. Now you won't be able to see this, but this first one is domed like a bowl. Now that's a anti-judder ring, so that's very important that you get it in the right orientation. And this is the other washer. It's just a plain flat washer that goes in behind it, and a final friction disc. Okay, so now with all the clutch plates removed, I've gone ahead and removed the clutch puller and the nut which holds the clutch carriage on. Now I should note, this lip here is bent in onto a little tab on the shaft. Now to get it off, you need to knock this out and use a clutch holding tool, or you can just put it in gear and just make sure the bike doesn't go anywhere and undo this nut. Now because this part of the nut has been knocked in, you're going to need a new one of these. Also, you're going to need a new washer that sits behind it. Let me get it out. You're going to need a new one of these because this has a very slight dome to it, kind of like a spring washer. This is noted on here, it says out, so that is the outside as it comes. So we're going to be replacing these two. There is another washer in behind, but I don't think you need to replace that. That's just a standard washer. With all these items off and made in order, this should just slide straight off. And that is what holds the clutch. Okay, next we're going to remove this. To do this, we're going to take off this washer at the back. And there is a bearing just in here. Now what we're going to do is I've got my magnet stuck to the bearing. We're going to give it a good old wiggle and try and pull this bearing out. Okay, so better than a magnet is a small pair of pliers. You can get in. There's a little flats you can just bite onto. And as you wiggle the cage, pull on the bearing. Now I've got the bearing out, right there, or the bearing carrier. The bearing itself is in here. It's a needle roller bearing. Be very careful with this, try not to get any dirt in there. Again, place it on a nice clean surface. And we can lift this straight out. Now, when it comes to putting this back in, there's two lots of teeth. Now, what you'll need to do, there's a little hole just here. Don't know if you can see that. You'll need to put a screwdriver or a large punch in through there, and this back cog moves slightly. It's not like a spring or something. There we are, springs. And then you'll just need to align the teeth, and then there's another cog just here which it slides onto, so remember that. Okay, now we have a nice view of the back of the gear shifter. I can see straight away what's broken. There's a pin just here. I don't know if you can see it, I'll show you closely in more detail later, which the spring acts upon. So basically the spring's fine, it's the pin that's broken. Okay, now we're around the other side of the bike. We need an 8mm spanner, and we're going to undo this nut here and slide this off of the shaft. Now, when you put it back together, please note where the dot is in relation to the pinch point, because that's going to dictate where your shifter ends up. If it's too low or too high, you can adjust it on this. Now with this bolt, you do need to take it all the way out, otherwise it won't slide off, like so. And just for safekeeping, I'm going to put it back in there and just lie this out of the way. So also what's been recommended is to put some insulation tape, just a thin layer around these teeth here, just to stop that from catching on the O-rings or the seals on the inside of this shaft, so it doesn't scag them. Otherwise then you're going to get an oil leak. So next we're going to get a screwdriver and just try and prise that E-clip off. Okay, so now I've put a small amount of insulation tape around there. I've taken the E-clip off. I'm hoping that washer will just pass over the insulation tape and I won't need to take this cover off. So now I'm just going to push this shaft in and through. Okay, so I've got the washer off. I'll put that with the E-clip somewhere safe and clean. Oh, it's dripping a bit of oil. Yeah, that'll catch the worst of it. Now we're going to go around the other side. You can see that this has been held on by this spring, so you just want to take that off and that should stay put. But I am going to roll up some tissue and just try and stuff it down here to prevent anything from falling down. So now we've pulled that spring off, this should slide right out. There we go. As you can see, this is the spring, and there's the pin it acts upon, and it's broken. Now I tried to get a new one of these, but the only one I could find was this pin at the back, which obviously isn't broken. So I'm going to have to try and do something with that. I've heard you can drill it out and tap a thread into this pin, which saves it, but we'll see what we can do. Okay, so now you join me at my makeshift workbench. We're going to need to disassemble at least some of this. So to start off with, we're going to remove this circlip here, and then we're going to slide everything over this way and off the end. Now we need to lay all of this in order so it doesn't get mixed up. Okay, so this is the order it comes off in. Take the first circlip off, then there's a washer behind, and then there's a spring which catches on this pin, and then there's another washer behind the spring before another circlip on the end. Now I'm going to try and not disturb any of this, so I'm going to leave that on for now. Now what I've done is I've used a punch and a hammer, and I've knocked out what was left of the pen, which was on the end of that. So I've knocked a hole in that. Now an M5 bolt fits perfectly in this hole here, as you can see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill down into here, and I'm going to tap an M5 thread. I'm going to bolt this up in there with some Loctite so it's not going to go anywhere. Okay, now this is the end result. So all I've done is I've centre punched the middle of this as best I could, drilled it, so I used a 2mm pilot, so then a 4mm all the way through, and then I've put a M5 tap through it, and this is my high tensile M5 by 20, so 20mm long M5, and that screws in quite nicely. So now what we're going to do, I've got some Loctite. Now I would use red, but unfortunately I've only got blue, so I'm going to put a nice smearing all over this, You know, I'm not expecting to take this apart anytime soon, so that's a nice amount on there. And then I'm going to obviously get the orientation right. You know, don't want to get this wrong. Slide it through there. And make sure you get this around the right way as well. So it goes like that. Okay. And then thread that on all the way. And then get a pair of pliers and an Allen key or spanner and do that up nice and tight. Okay, so I've got it all tightened up now. I've wiped off any excess Loctite from there. It's all nice now. Now it's time to reassemble it. But before we do that, I just want to point out, drilling this was not easy. If you've got a pellet drill, then and a vise perhaps, then it's not too bad. But if you don't have a vise or a pellet drill, it's extremely difficult. You can do it if you have a vise and some good drill bits, but like you can see, I didn't do a perfect job, but it is doable without a pellet drill. So now we're going to reassemble. Start off with the washer, slide that on. Now I wasn't going to replace the spring since it wasn't broken. I thought, since I've already got one, that's the number right there. Exactly the same. Slide that on. Okay, now this does slide on all the way. I've just had to use a screwdriver just to push it in all the way. Now these go either side of this part. You've got to pull them apart, clip them on. Next, you've got the other washer. And now the circlip. Pray it doesn't go flying. That's what it tends to normally do with me. There we go. Now, just to make sure it's all the way home, just push it around with a screwdriver and just look, see, it's sat in. So there we are, all back together with the new spring and the modification. Now time to put it on the bike. What we're going to do is slide it back through nice and carefully. To get it, I believe, over that as well. Let's have a little look on the other side to see if it's home. Yep, that looks like it's all the way through. So let's get this spring back on, like so. We'll go on the other side and put the washer and E-clip back on. Okay, so now I'm just going to take this tape off. Let's keep the seal intact. Okay, so now we have the washer. Now I'm gonna probably have to push this shaft back through a little bit just to get this washer back on. I should have thought of this. Okay, I've just had to pull this shaft back out to get that washer on as I push the shaft through, because I didn't take that cover off. To get this all the way through and home, the trick is to lift this lever up, which brings this away from this back section, which then allows you to push it all the way home, and then this spring goes either side of that peg. So that is all the way through now. Okay, so now it's all the way through. We can see this E-clip, well, this groove to put the E-clip into. So there's nothing wrong with this E-clip. It is worth checking them, make sure they haven't distorted or anything. Otherwise, they're not going to do their job. So now, like we did with the circlip, just give it a nice little turn. Make sure it's not going to go anywhere. So this is going to keep all the crap out from inside the engine and away from the rubber seal, which stops the oil from coming out. So I had it on one notch over the pin, so like that. My big ass foot to fit under it. Right. That's on there. Let's tighten that up. It doesn't have to be dogged tight, but just ain't going to go anywhere. So before we put the clutch carry back in, just have another little check. We've got the spring on, that isn't going anywhere. That's all in. You can shift the gears, make sure it works, which I've done. Next to fit is going to be the clutch carrier. But before we do that, we just want to give this face a good clean, get all the old gasket off. So make sure you've jammed something inside, stop any crap from falling down in. And get like a little Stanley blade and carefully scrape round and clean up all the old gasket. It's best to really take your time doing it, not to rush it, because if you miss a bit and your new gasket doesn't seal properly, you'll have an oil leak and you'll have to take it all off again. So do it once, do it right. So I've had a clean up, got all the little bits out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run the bike a little bit after I've finished, and then I'm going to drop all the oil and do an oil change, just in case any crap's got down in there. It needs an oil change anyway, so it's good timing. So now I'm going to fit the clutch cover in. So these pegs here line up with these holes here. This will be fun. So if I try and do that like that. Okay, so it's in now. The little trick I found was get as close as you can and try and push in the needle bearing and its housing, just to keep this central on this shaft, and then use something like a screwdriver with a bit more leverage and just wiggle it and it will go in. And then once this is back all the way, you'll see down in here the front face of this gear will be flush with the gear that's in here. And once that's in, you can push the bearing home by just giving it a wiggle and pushing, and it will all go in sweet. If you find that you're slightly off, I find you can get a pair of pliers and just very carefully pull on one of these chains which drives the oil pump, and it will turn those teeth or those pegs around just a little bit at a time if you find it's not lining up properly, because you can't see where the pegs are when you've got the bearing in there. So now we're going to fit the washer. Okay, you see the grooves on the back of that, so you know it goes that way. See grooves, my little markings from where it's been up against those bearings. And then we've got the clutch carrier. Now, one of the washers you're meant to replace. I wasn't sure which one was which on the parts diagram, so I bought both of them. So first on is the standard flat washer, which is this one. As soon as I've bought it, I might as well use it. No point sending it back for what it's worth. Yeah, identical. So that goes on. Now, this is the one you've got to replace. Probably because in time it might lose its spring, because it's made out of spring steel. Basically because it's got a slight dome to it. I don't know if you can see that. Slightly dished. So out goes out. And time for the new nut. This is the nut. Even though it says 22mm, it requires a 30mm socket. So if we look at the old one, notice how they punched the edge of it into this little groove here. That stops it from undoing. This new one, obviously, nice and fresh. So, put the new one on. Like so. And we'll wind that on. And we'll torque this up to 98 Newton meters. Now, you're meant to use a clutch holding tool, which either I think Triumph Zone locks into these points here, or you can get ones which go into these pegs, and that holds this still to allow you to torque it up. However, I've left it in gear, so all I'll do is I'll push it all the way that way, and hopefully I can get the torque required. So I'm going to wind that on now, and then once I've torqued it up, I'm going to get a small chisel in on the where the mark cutout is on the spline, and knock it in. Okay, so I've now torqued it up. First gear wasn't quite enough. I mean, you could have put it in a higher gear, perhaps, but instead I just put my foot on the brake and gone from there, and it was enough. So it's 98 Newton meters. Once you've done that, you just need to knock in the top of that just there. According to my Haynes manual, something which we should all have, the should be 9 friction plates and 8 plain plates, and that should give a total thickness of between 41.54mm and 42.54mm. So there's only a 1mm difference between a new one and a worn one. That equates to between 2.8 and 3mm per friction plate. So I'm going to start at the very front. So I take them all off. I'll go through them one by one. First one looks good. Thickness better if I had a digital one, but make do. That is exactly 3mm. So there's nothing wrong with that, despite 18,000 miles. Again, inspect this. Nothing wrong with that. Again, 3mm. And I'm just going to go through them all. I'm then going to measure the lot. Okay, so I've gone through and I've measured them all now. They all read 3mm, and as a pack they actually read 42.3mm, which means they've worn about 0.2 of a mil from factory, which is not bad for 18,000 miles, I don't think. So I've put them all back in order, the correct orientation, friction plate, plain, friction plate, plain, all the way through the pack till you get to the last one. This last one is thinner, as in thinner, and inside goes the 2 washers. I'm going to put the first thinner plate in and get lined up. Slide that all the way back, and then I'm going to put the flat washer in. That sits on the inside, and then the domed, dished, okay, goes on like so. So imagine the bowl is like that. That then sits on in there. And now we can start to put the rest of them in, like so. And we'll just keep doing this until they are all back on. See you in a moment. And voila, they're all back on. This, which we must not forget to put in, goes in there. Now that acting arm sits on here, like so. Now that's back on. We've got this release shaft in there. We can then put the springs and the bolts back in. So these are the springs I was telling you about. So they slide in like that, and they're quite strong, okay? They apply an awful lot of pressure to those plates. And we will just start them off finger tight. And what's very important is that we do these up all the same. You know, we don't want to do one more than the other. So once this is in, we're going to do probably a turn at a time until they're all home. And then we're going to torque them up. Okay, so I've wound them all in now, just so they've nipped. Then you get your trusted torque wrench, and you'll tighten them up in a crisscross fashion like we've been doing, up to 12 Newton meters. There we are. Okay, so now it's time to fit the clutch cover. So make sure this surface is nice and clean. I know we cleaned this earlier, but you also do need to clean this cover as well. So again, get nice and clean. Don't leave anything on there, anything that might cause a leak, because it will be a headache. So this is the little mechanism inside. That's connected to this. So you pull the clutch, that pulls round, and it pulls this out like so. So when it comes to putting it on, make sure this is all the way back, otherwise this isn't going to engage properly. So just keep an eye on that. We're also going to want to put the new gasket on as well. So here's the new gasket. Obviously make sure you get the right orientation. Also that lines up nicely. Just put it over that dowel. I did try and get the other dowel out of the cover, but unfortunately it was pretty well in there. So make sure there's no crap inside. Get the orientation right. I'm going to line up that first dowel. I'll just get my finger underneath and line up the other dowel, which is down here, and tap it home. There you are. So it's all nice and flush. Gasket's in there. You can see all the holes. You can actually make your own gasket if you get gasket paper, but it's always best just to spend a little bit more and get the proper job. So next we're going to go around and put all the bolts in the cover, just finger tight, and then we'll go around and torque them. Remember, we've got long bolts here and here. Okay, now we've just wound in those bolts just so they've nipped and pulled the cover nicely. Now it's time to torque them. These are 12 Newton meters. There is a tightening down procedure. You can see the order. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It's 11 bolts in total. It's 12 Newton meters. So I'm going to go around now and torque them all up. Okay, so I've just gone around and torqued them all up now. And then I've just gone back around again, just to make sure they're all tight. They take a little bit more second time round. So now we're going to reconnect the clutch. Now you can pull it round and you can feel some resistance there. So now I'm just going to reconnect this back in like so. And then we're going to tighten this back up. I think it was a 12 millimeter. I haven't adjusted the other side, so I'm hoping, no more adjustment needed. A little bit of play, which I think is about right. Just give a lever a pull. Yep, it's working nicely. So, job done.